much cooperation with our neighbors at Klaipėda University. So she's been here more recently to work with Klaipėda University with grants and doing some research projects. She's had contracts with MIT and University of Iowa. And many book chapters and edited books. So I can say many and much, but Audra's life is not just research and writing. She also does gardening and work.
And she paints?
And she paints, she's an artist, so. We're really, really glad you're here on this last day of classes and looking forward to seeing what you have to say.
I'm not sure.
We'll make it up as we go.
Welcome.
Thank you, Robin. So as Robin was talking, I just kind of brought up the timeline. I tried to do it with ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is like, you give it, actually I use Copilot, you give it the specific instructions and it just changes stuff. In the end, I just had to do it myself after spending an hour. Okay, so this is kind of big picture where we're going. I don't know how far we'll get, but I'll do kind of my teaching style where you have to do the work, because I believe in the andragogical principles of learning that we learn by doing. So you'll get to talk with each other, not just listen to me. And if there are things you want me to talk about, just let me know. I'm pretty flexible. I will answer whatever you want to know more about. The pictures I include, I usually include some pictures from my own photography, and they kind of send some sort of a message. I'm usually not interpreting them, but it's for those of you who are visual and don't have to look at the text, you can just wander on the picture. So I'll talk about kind of the focus will be on frame clashes and rich points, and I'll explain in a little bit. But I teach qualitative methodologies. So basically research methodology. I work primarily right now for the past almost 20 years. Mostly doctoral students. I have worked with a few master's students. I have one undergrad Lithuanian descent person for undergrad thesis committees and methodologies. And the way I explain qualitative research to people, when people think of research, they think of numbers and statistics. So that's numbers research, and I do the people research. I don't do the numbers research. It's been a while since I used to do it. And my kind of training and is in ethnography, and as well as broader qualitative. So ethnography in Lithuania, when I started teaching ethnography here, was about 2014 maybe. I started Mykolas Romeris University, Klaipėda University. People tended to associate ethnography with anthropology and going to tribes and other countries. But ethnography, LCC is a culture. We can study LCC, different aspects of LCC through ethnographic methodologies. So I'll talk a little bit about it. We'll see how far we get. And I have a question here. What would you like to know? Anything off the top of your head right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
The connection of qualitative research and arts-based.
Okay.
But I'm maybe the only one who wants to know that.
Yes. If we get to that, I'll try to incorporate some of the arts ideas into what we do. Okay. So
When you present your qualitative research, do you present who you are? You put down your positioning statement.
yes.
And then also, how do you see your own growth in the process of presenting the data?
Okay. That's a good question. It's part of doing qualitative research. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just interested in what you have found to be successful in teaching others to do qualitative research.
And that's one of the, right now I'm writing a book on teaching qualitative research. It's due basically in June or May. The publisher with extended deadline. And sometimes it's tough because I love to teach it, but when you get, especially at the doctoral level, get students who have 3 or 4 the research classes and they're all having statistics, it's a mind shift. You have to, qualitative research and ethnography is a way of thinking about the world. It's a way of living, it's not just doing the research. Like your question, you have to really know yourself and consider your perspectives and your influences and the relationships with the way you create relationships in the research. So, yeah. It's tough and it's sometimes hard. Some students really resist. So one of the aspects I do is try to normalize the confusions, and we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. That's basically to, I'll use some cartoons that I use in my teaching too. So this cartoon, you all know the why the chicken crossed the road joke. This is kind of ethnocentrism. Both are in their own worlds. And often when we're in our own world, we're not even aware of the world we're in. Sometimes you need that outsider to come in, and ethnographers, researchers can become those outsiders who come in with their own perspectives. We all have biases. Bias is not a negative. We need to bring it in, but acknowledge its existence and help someone understand that you are on the other side of the road. So this is briefly, I put in some of my history here. What I want to emphasize or share a little more is kind of, I graduated from high school in 91 or 90, right now I don't remember, but that was the transitional period in 91, thank you. Yeah, transitional period in Lithuania. And in high school, we basically were exposed to two worlds. We lived in two worlds. There was the official, and then there were unofficial ways of learning. We read literature, a poem. At least I had teachers who helped me see other meanings beyond the official curriculum. We had a great Russian language teacher, Lithuanian language teacher, who exposed us. My Russian language teacher was probably my favorite subject in school. I can't speak it anymore after 30 years. But she had brain cancer, she didn't care. So she would teach stuff that wasn't allowed to be taught in the Soviet Union. And then we did Christmas behind closed doors, and New Year's, the official New Year's, the Soviet system. So we started in Panevėžys too, right? Yeah, Alumni, we started when there was no LCC. It was just the Language Institute. We started in Panevėžys in 1991. I was in English language program. We moved to Klaipėda. We went to protests. When Panevėžys didn't want LCC to be there, we went and protested at the city hall trying to explain that Mennonites are not some sort of sect, that they're trying to bring their religion, that it's an English language school, we want a college, English-speaking college, and we ended up moving to Klaipėda, so the three of us moved to Klaipėda along with the college. When I graduated in '96, we didn't have an official BA degree. We had equivalent of a BA. And I ended up being invited to Fresno Pacific University, where my equivalent BA was acknowledged. So on my official record, I have master's in '98, and I have an official BA degree in 2001 from LCC. When I came back with a master's, then I had to go through the Lithuania. So I grew up in two worlds, and when I was in my multiple worlds, when I was at the University of California in Santa Barbara, and I encountered qualitative research, especially ethnography, and I've written about it somewhere that it just made sense. Like statistics, variables, you have to really limit things and have own very specific operational definitions, and my answer to everything is, it depends. You have to understand the context, you have to understand the history. So when I came to qualitative research that allows you to think in many different ways, and it's okay to have people have different perspectives. You don't have to narrow it down. So it made sense to me. I started studying more on, because I always wanted to know more than I could study, and I realized when I came back to LCC after my master's, I was teaching for 3 years, started with literature classes, and then Jim Miniger, the president at that time, invited me and said, well, we need someone who speaks Lithuanian to be able to teach TESOL classes. So there was no TESOL program at that time, but it was language acquisition, language assessment, and my master's included a lot of those courses, so I started teaching education at that time, and then let's go to see something else I forgot. Kind of when I got to UCSB, kind of started learning methodology, and what I realized, once you know how to research, you can study anything. And one of the reasons after teaching at LCC, I decided to go back to a PhD program. In my master's program, the first one, I had learned a lot about literature, I had learned a lot about language acquisition, language assessment, all of those things, but I didn't learn how to research. And I needed 2098, 2001, we didn't have all the resources the library has now. I didn't know how to even use and how to do research, so I went back in order to learn how to learn, basically. And that's why I love methodology. I ended up doing invention education with MIT because they needed an ethnographer to help them understand what they do. Okay, I have no STEM background. I learned a lot about invention education and STEM through the research work I do. And then I started, after California, I started in one university in Texas, I moved to another one, they recruited me to another one, and 2019, right before COVID, I moved to Florida. And my sister and I joke, she likes warm weather, I like cold weather, but we live in opposite climates. So when I moved from California, I was in Santa Barbara. It's a moderate climate, so it's kind of always nice. It doesn't get too hot in the summer. And I moved to Corpus Christi, Texas. It's really hot and really humid. That was one of my culture shocks. And the second culture shock for me, California has very strict environmental programs, recycling. When I moved to Corpus Christi, then I have recycling. I kept separating things out anyway, but I have to still take it to the trash. So that's was my two culture shock, humidity and heat. Took me about a year to figure that one out, how to live in that. And then the other one was kind of how to deal with recycling. So I want you to turn to a partner and think of what are some of your culture shocks that may have been big ones, like moving to Lithuania, or small ones, things that happen in your life that you just had to figure out and adjust. And these are just some guiding questions. What happened? What were your expectations? Why was it a culture shock for you? And then what did you do to figure it out? Turn to someone next to you, behind you. Think of a culture shock. I know, I'm pretty sure all of you have.
So, culture shock.
I'll talk about when I first moved to Malaysia. I was shocked by the amount of holidays we had in a year because we had 4 days at the summer season, and then 4 was the secondary. That is why there have been a lot of events.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, oh yeah. Right.
No,
Anyone want to share your brief culture shock and how you overcame it?
Are you doing ethnographic research now?
Okay. Same. Totally new world.
Yeah.
Yes, I talk with my students when they start the first class. It's learning, especially qualitative research, is like learning a second language in a lot of ways.
When I arrived, my name is Stanley anyway. I'm from Africa. I'm from Nigeria originally. I studied in Poland. My first year arrival in that country was about summertime. And you know how we dress in Africa, loosey dress and bigger something. But here in Europe, people wear on their minis. And you say, oh, no. They didn't go into church. They are loose. I said, come on. An African? Look at these people. They are not Christians. Oh! It was a shock. And not only for me, for Africans who followed, who came as well to study as students in Poland. We're sure we're looking at Europeans and saying, they're not Christians. They're not Christians because Christians must dress well properly, cover their head, before you pray. And the second culture shock was food adaptation. I was not good. I used to eat potato soup and all these things. We in Africa, we eat cakes, vegetable things. But here, oh no. But as time goes on, I started winning myself from all these shocks, getting adapted. And as I got adapted, I become one of them. I belong as a stranger, as a sojourner, and as an immigrant. Yes, adaptation and this culture shock matters.
And you just became an ethnographer. Life is like that. When we experience culture shock changes, like this cartoon, something strikes you, something makes you uncomfortable, and I'm going to the next slide here, and I'll ask for another example. It's a frame clash. You can, like that cartoon and this one, you can see something and say, okay, they're not Christians because they're not dressing the way I see it, they should be dressing. The other person is saying, no, you're wrong, I'm right. But what if we find other ways of looking? Is it 6 or 9? Could be both. Plus, minus. So a frame clash refers to, like we all have frames. we all have expectations. A great example of expectations about food, expectations about clothing, expectations about child rearing, expectations of what teaching and learning look like. And then when we encounter something that doesn't fit our expectations, we have that frame clash. Or in psychologists, I think call it schemas, correct me if I'm wrong. Similar idea. And what you can do, you can stay with this first picture and just, okay, agree to disagree, go with a conflict, or you can turn it into what Michael Ager talks about, and we write in ethnography, is rich points. Rich points become, you make a decision to learn something from it. So great example of, you learn something from it, you become then part, now you understand both worlds, because you have to, back to the question of positionality, you have to examine your own and yourself, and then you have to understand others. When you come together, it becomes rich because you learn. You can stay with the first one, abandon, have conflict, and ignore it. And when I first moved to Fresno Pacific, about the first year, I was criticizing a lot of American things. And then I just had to make a conscious decision. I live here. I need to adjust. I can't just fall in for the criticism. And that's where the learning happened through that, the previous slide with that. Confusion is good. I try to teach my students. Failure is good. I learned that from invention education. You fail, it's an opportunity for learning if you take the moment to reflect on it. If you think, what did I do? What do I need to do? Rather than blame a professor, blame the culture that they don't do what I want them to do. So frame clashes are the clashes of expectations. We all have them. We often are not aware of them until something happens where we have that confusion. And then we get to choose. We make it a rich point, learn something, opportunity for learning. I call rich points as opportunities for learning, or we will just move on and stay in our world. So anyone else want to share an example or ask a question?
I can share, because I just had a video. I didn't share with the group, but I just realized that it was, I don't know if it is a culture shock, but one, maybe like a little bit of a shock and an observation. When I was in US, now I am thinking, maybe I didn't have any very strong culture shocks, but these cultures are in very details. You notice details, because when you first come, you think, the culture is about the same, but then those details get you. And one of the details I noticed in US, I went there in '99, so I was youth, not like our youth are right now, but the post-Soviet youth, and so I was very surprised and even shocked that American students, I noticed, they sit and they constantly talk, like they talk a lot, and they talk a lot about feelings, like always about feelings, emotions. And I was thinking one time, I don't even know how to talk about feelings and emotions in my native language. I don't even know the vocabulary. And then I realized that, in the Soviet years, like we didn't talk about feelings and emotions. And Americans, which struck me, they always talk about emotions, feelings, and always how they feel, And I'm thinking, what is this? You go and you over here, we don't. So that was one big thing.
Yeah, and try to do therapy. English or your own language. It's in the details. A lot of those things are. Come on over here. Marie. Now I can bring in the back.
Everyone knows I'm late.
That's okay. We all have lives and teaching. That's not a problem. Anyone else want to share your culture shock?
I can share.
One cultural difference that I'm coming to one of your questions, like what did you do about it? And finding that just understanding that this is something that's typical in the culture can make a big difference about how you perceive it or how you think about it. Because one cultural difference that I've experienced here in Lithuania is in communication and how Lithuanians give feedback or criticism versus how Americans tend to do that. So as Americans, we kind of are trained to soften it. You know, you give a couple of positives before you say the negative, and you give a little praise sandwich or whatever. And Lithuanians tend to be more direct about this. And I, you know, in my early years here had some experiences where I would get emails from Lithuanian colleagues that were very direct about, you know, this is wrong, or this is, and I would read those emails and just be like, and but finding out a little bit later that this is just a difference in, you know, in how communication is done, helped me to interpret those things more correctly and not think, well, this person hates me, or this person is just a jerk, or whatever, but to recognize that this is a cultural difference.
Can I comment on that? I'm a student. Yeah, I think, what do you think? I think a lot of students at FCC got that kind of cultural shock too. Like, for example, for me, as a when I come here as a freshman, so after I kind of submitted my essay, the professor was like, "Oh, your essay is really good. I really like it." And then she gave me like 80%, and I'm like, "I don't understand. It's good." She said, "It's still not 80%." And I was like, "Okay, I don't understand." So I think most of the students that come here is kind of the first impression they have from the professors, like who are from the U.S. So
Yeah. You're all nice and kind until you get it right. I am one of those professors who are nice and that's in the US. And they tend to be a little more blunt. I get in trouble for it. Yeah. Asta, you wanted to share something?
I wanted to share one of the freshmen when we met in August this year, because I was a freshwoman too. So from America, people said, why my neighbor is always telling how her pain is, how her back is in pain. When I ask her how is she doing, how is she, and she starts talking about her back, how it is aching. Then I explain them that if you ask how are you, please spend 5 minutes for listening, because otherwise you just say hello and that's it. If you ask how are you, then be patient to listen. That's how we understand that question.
I've trained my therapist not to ask me how are you. For years. She never asked me how are you anymore. But I want to know if you ask that question, it's a formulaic. In my English studies, there is a formula.
But I want to add to this, you know, for the person who is like from the culture like us, this question is really like, I remember I went to US and I had a very difficult first week, and everything was, and people, you know, that I meet, my new classmates, they ask me how are you, and one time, you know, I was thinking if one more person asks how are you, I will start crying, like really, because when they ask how are you, in my head, I already think how I am, you know. For Americans, it might be just hello, but for us, you know, I already start thinking how I am. And I'm thinking I sit in the classroom and please nobody ask how I am, because it was just so difficult, you know, and you are still asking how are you, you know. It's like really, it's a big thing, especially for us, you know.
And British do similar. They have to ask, how do you do? You have to answer, how do you do, right?
Yeah, it's just like hello.
Yeah.
So when it's a change, when it's learn, I've had to learn, well, I trained my therapist, but I also had to learn just the hello. It doesn't mean anything. I'm not going to respond with my feelings. Unless you ask me in a different way. And then you really care, because usually that question is just fine, because unexpected is.
But if you don't sort of have that shift in understanding of what that, or the different understandings of what that question means, then you end up with these stereotypes or assumptions, because I know that people have an idea that Americans are shallow because they ask that question and don't listen to the
So that kind of moving from those frame clashes to creating the rich points, which are the opportunities for learning. What can we learn from the way people respond to how are you? As an example, which takes us to the idea of language and culture, which was one of the versions of the title of my presentation. Michael Agar talks about language culture and some sorts of ethnography. I do interactional ethnography, and I have a book. I have it in Klaipėda on Manto Street. I'll bring it, donate it to LCC. So we look at culture through the language perspective. Culture is not something that exists. When people ask what's Lithuanian culture, I don't know how to answer that question. It's too big. What group are you focusing on? How are they speaking? LCC is a very specific language culture, and I'll ask you to think about how is it a language culture. So each group, each family, any culture, anthropologists talk about it as a C word. Nobody knows what it means. So anthropologists try to avoid using the C word. Some people think culture is something pre-existing, ethnic or national. In ethnographic qualitative work, culture is something we make together. So each class you teach becomes its own culture when people come together, two or more people coming together to accomplish a common goal. That's where culture starts. If they continue meeting over time, you create it. It's not something pre-existing. Each classroom is its own culture. I teach qualitative methodology, the introductory course. Each semester is very, very different. And what I can cover in one class is very different what is covered in the other class because of how the students interact. So my teaching is not me lecturing, is we are creating the culture of learning really together. So that's the concept of language culture. So let's look at this curve. What's going on here in the first, these are old, some of these are old cartoons. So what's the kind of the language culture here? Language and culture going on in the first one. Like this is kind of their normal way of being. Cows, I don't know if they're cows. I don't know if they call themselves cows. They're on 2 feet. And they can talk. Someone's watching out next to the road. Then they see a car is coming. Is car mean, does the car even mean the vehicle? C-A-R with an exclamation mark, you can study it linguistically. What does that mean in the cow culture? And then car is coming, what do? They act the way they think the folks in the car expect them to act. When it's gone, they're back to their normal culture. So what we think culture is, we don't necessarily know, unless like Emmy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless like Emmy, you spend time just position yourself. How long can the cows perform on 4 legs? And people say that ethnographic work takes a long time. It doesn't have to take a long time. If the class meets for a semester, that's how the culture is created. You go to a different class and that's a different culture. You can study for a semester. You have a group of faculty or someone or students doing something, the basketball team. You can study it for seasons. It needs to be bounded timeline. It doesn't have to be 2 or 3 years of traditional ones. And then if you embed yourself, yes, at first, people will kind of perform and act the way they think the researcher wants to see, if they're nice. If they're not, maybe if they're Lithuanians, they'll kind of tell you what you're doing wrong. Over time, you become part. That's again back to your question about your positionality. You have to be very self-aware. What what are you doing, and no, you cannot be a fly on the wall. That same fly on the wall, a fly on the wall is still annoying. The fly may not think it's being seen, but we see that fly on the wall, and some people will attend to it and others not. So over time, we start seeing this more pattern, normal pattern. There's no such thing as normal, but a pattern that is more common, and then what they do and so the clash of expectations. So these are just some quick definitions, but if we think of language and culture, they're intermingled. You can't really talk about culture without using language. You can look at actions, you can look at what people do, you can look at artifacts, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but we express ourselves through language, and in some research, what counts as language, we tend to think, again, the linguistic, the speaking communication, but nonverbal expressions are language. Tools we use are kind of language. Some of the fields within qualitative have moved to like post-humanist research, how a desk and how it can be used or cannot be used is an actor. It shapes what you can and cannot do. It's not just an object. It influences the cultures we create. So the language is about communication, and communication from Schultz, methodologies, they talk about people are context for each other. People are texts for each other. We read each other. It's much harder fully online, but even online you can read each other. So people are context for each other. We are languages in some ways. So it's, in qualitative research, as one of my students said, we tend to create new definitions and rethink taken for granted ideas. And I think that, for me, that's important, because we often assume things, and what if we stopped assuming as much and try to learn a different way, or try to reconceptualize. So there is a book I keep following on Facebook. I still haven't gotten the book, Pagal Kampa. I saw it's being sold in Vilnius. Like, it has these Lithuanian sayings and what it means. So anyone has that book already? But yeah.
There's also a Facebook link.
Yeah, that's where I
It's
get
so funny.
Yeah. So they post this cartoon and the Lithuanian expression, Jūra iki kelio, overestimating, or that's one interpretation. But if we look at the language, Jūra iki kelio, the sea is up to their knees. What does it signal about the culture of the language culture of Lithuanian? The importance of the sea. And for some people, the kind of how people may perceive the sea as something smaller than an ocean. You don't say ocean is up to your knees in Lithuanian because we don't have an ocean. So that, given the sayings, proverbs signal embedded meanings that have been created by people over time. And the language changes when you're living in the country, whether it's a country where you come into LCC, your language changes. How you talk about teaching, how you talk about learning, how you talk about grades will change because of the group you're in. There is a book called Metaphors We Live By, very old one, Mary, you know that one, where it says every word we use, like when we say, I don't have time, or means time is a commodity. Time is something you have or don't have. What if you change it, I will make time, you become an agent, not a victim of time. And you will make time what's important to you. So just the words we use signal our ways of thinking, and this is one of the things I tend to do, look at the discourse, the meanings underneath. I don't do an everyday interaction because it's way too complicated, but once my students learn some of this discourse language focus, they drive their partners and friends crazy. What did you mean by something that you're saying? What did you mean by how are you? Did you really want me to answer? So back to your partners. These are, some people were asking about alligators. Yes, in Florida there are lots of alligators. One of the cultural things is every body of water in Florida will have or may have an alligator, at least one alligator. So you cannot swim unless you want to take a risk.
So it's hot and you cannot swim?
Yeah.
So why do you
Pools. A lot of houses will have their pools, and then of course there's the ocean alligators that are rarer in the oceans. But rivers, people risk. You can look around, see if there is an alligator. You have to know the season. I've taken these pictures, like here. This is a path through the wetlands, and I was basically just walking down this path, and the alligators are just there. And unless you harass them, they don't attack you, they don't care. And some of them I zoomed in on my camera, but. So turn again to your partners, you can find other partners and think, what are the language cultures you belong to? Could be your family, could be, usually there's subgroups that you belong to, and think about what is the language, what's unique in the languages you use. Like some families create their own ways of talking that nobody else will know. Like when a stranger comes in, they don't know what you're talking about. What's the culture aspect in your language culture, and then how did it develop, and what is your culture? Turn to your partners for a couple minutes. Are new partners who you want to
First, because a lot of interesting. I know I get you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to not going to report back. So how do we understand and study language cultures? This is where ethnography and qualitative research comes in. We look at time, we look at context, we look at what people do, we look at people's positionalities and perspectives, who we are, how we interact. We have an active role. The fly on the wall has an active role in whatever situation the fly is in, from this qualitative way of thinking. And here another one of the old cartoons where you see the technology is very old, and some of you young people have never seen them probably. I graduated from LCC 30 years ago. Some of you weren't even born. So if you spend a lot of time with that group, they'll probably get their technology out and allow those anthropologists, ethnographers to understand their lives the way they really are. But if you go into a classroom to evaluate for half an hour, someone will perform for you. They'll try to do their best. But if you spend a week in the classroom or 2 weeks in the classroom, life goes back to the patterns that people are creating. At sunset, these birds, these are 2 ibises and 2 roseate spoonbills. Time is golden hour, sun is setting. The white birds and the pink birds all look pink. So the ways to understand the social situation, these are some of the aspects of any culture that we create. Time, actors, spaces. You can't get to feelings unless you're talking to a person or you're watching someone like Bata over time, how she gets annoyed at how are you every single time. So these are aspects that we will study qualitatively, and I'll have you ponder on this. What is the LCC language culture? My LCC language culture in 1996 was very different than your LCC language culture. I don't know now. I would probably need to embed myself here for a year or at least half a year to try to figure out what is LCC now. What are the languages? Who are the people? How does the language get created? And these are, I grew up in Lithuania picking mushrooms. When I went to Florida, I was really nicely surprised that there are lots of edible mushrooms in Florida. And I discovered these ones. These are pineapple boletes. They're edible mushrooms. I've never seen them. They're edible. And figured out where to find them, or how to pick them. So when we're studying, another way of studying the cultures is through these kinds of setting questions. Who can do and say what? So power relations will come through that. Roles, relationships. What's the language tune with whom? Objects, artifacts also become important. Conditions become important. So you can't generalize. It's always situated, but you can go in deep or develop a deeper understanding of what it's like to be a member. So, anyone know what these animals are? I did not know what they were. Manatees, yeah. Lithuanian Lamantinas or Euroscarpe, cow of the sea. When I went to Florida, we have springs near where I live, and they all, when it gets cold in the ocean, they move into the springs that are always at 72 Fahrenheit, 22 Celsius, because they're big, like sweet potatoes, but they cannot survive in cold water. So basically, that's what I do. I am an ethnographer. I do ethnography. I'm not going to go through all of that, but we study everyday life. And the study of everyday life, including other more general qualitative perspectives, presumes that each person, each perspective is important. From one person's perspective, in other qualitative approaches, from one person's perspective in life, you can understand quite a bit about the social world. It's not just about an individual. Through an individual, you can get a glimpse into what life is like, and every life matters. And ethnography focuses on culture, as the words ethno means people, graphy means writing, so it's writing about people, we ask what's happening here. And that's kind of a way of thinking and understanding. I'm not going to go into that. Let's see. I will leave you with this one word. Doing research with people. There's a lot of research, both qualitative and quantitative, that has been on people or about people. What if we try to do research and study and just interact to understand with people? Means we need to get them to be part of the group. We have to help them shape what we do and how we do, rather than we go in, exploit their knowledge, exploit their life experiences, publish a paper or a book, and leave it at that. So the field has been moving a lot into working with people, sometimes for people. But to work for, you still have to work with people. And I took this picture of this palm, scrub palm, and the sunshine mimosas. They're growing together in this meadow that had been burned the previous year. And it just creates a lot more beauty when you work with people. So on that note, I will finish because I think I'm running out of time.